Anybody there? Good evening. Welcome to the February 4th, 2020 special joint Troy City Council and Planning Commission meeting. I'll start with the roll call. Ms. Dixon. Here.
Here. Here.
Here. Here. Here. Here. Here. All present. Thank you all for being here. Chairman Krentz and I are here. We're co-chairing this meeting, and obviously, I've said it before. I'll say it again. In my vision, this is one of a series of potential meetings, joint meetings, as we work toward resolving some potential issues in the city as they relate to planning and development, and some of the concerns that the residents who have brought forward to most of us at one point or another. I think as we have.
They
Can't hear. All right. It's all right. My back's to you. Anyway, as I was just saying that this is, as I foresee, in one of many meetings, or one of at least a series of meetings between the City Council and the Planning Commission to work towards resolving some potential issues and having a better understanding of where we are with our master plan, where we are with development projects as they relate to master planning and zoning, based on what we've heard from residents in the community quite loudly at times, so thank you for that. You know, I know we have a pretty full agenda tonight that the city management has put together. There is opportunity for public comment in this agenda. Obviously, this meeting is not about any specific project, but about the master plan as a whole and zoning and neighborhood nodes. So while many of you are probably here because of one specific project, please keep in mind that the most efficient use of the time tonight may not be to have a series of comments about one specific issue or project, especially as there has been opportunity at previous public hearings for those projects, and there will be in the future. That said, we're not here to silence anybody, and we can't forcibly stop you, but please be mindful of those thoughts as we move forward. There is a motion. I'd like to move that we waive City Council Rule number 17 for members of the public and visitors to move public comment to after the discussion items as printed in our agenda packet.
Support.
Okay. Moved by the chair and supported by Councilmember Abraham that we waive City Council Rule number 17 to members of the public and visitors to move public comment to after the discussion items. Just for discussion on that purpose, my perspective is I feel that there's a good chance that some of what someone may bring in public comment prior to hearing what our agenda is this evening brought forth by city management in our discussion, it could be redundant. So I think it might be best to have the presentation first, have council conversation and discussion with planning commissioners, and then certainly the opportunity for public comment. Any further discussion on that issue? And is this a city council vote or a joint vote? Just city council. Okay. The vote, Ms. Dixon. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries. So that leaves us with D, which is D1, Master Plan and Zoning Ordinance, Neighborhood Node Zoning Districts, and other planning-related topics to be initially presented by City Management. Because there's so many of us here, we'll make sure we all have an opportunity to speak when necessary, and I think it's probably best to defer to City Manager Miller as to when questions might be good to interject, just to keep things flowing. Does that make sense?
At the end of the presentation.
At the end of the presentation?
And in fact, though, that because we're going to have a facilitated discussion, that probably will answer the questions.
Perfect. So with that, I turn it over to City Manager Miller.
Well, there is one housekeeping matter, and thank you, Honorable Mayor and Council and members of the Planning Commission. We did receive some public comment this afternoon, and we just printed it off, so we'd like to. Once again, I want to thank both the Planning Commission and City Council for this opportunity, and I also want to take a real opportunity and chance just to thank all of the residents, because this is your master plan and zoning ordinance, and you are a critical part to this process. And as the mayor mentioned, we are embarking on a planning process which takes time and a number of meetings, and it will also involve public input throughout the whole process. The one thing the mayor mentioned at meetings, I don't think the planning commission and city council have met, and Bob, you probably can update me, probably in 2 years. So the best practice is probably once or twice a year. So I think from my standpoint, I will encourage that happen going forward. So what we're going to discuss a little bit is master plan and the zoning ordinance, and Ben Carlisle from Carlisle Wortman will present that aspect of it. And then the history of planning in Troy will be Dick Carlisle, and then neighborhood nodes will be Brent Savedon, our community development director. And then Ben and Dick will facilitate discussion with both the planning commission and the city council. The one thing that we have noticed in our experience is that it is a facilitated discussion is much more efficient in getting opinions and problems together as opposed to someone just speaking, because you can actually have an interaction and dig out what the points are. The other thing I want to note is that both Ben, Dick, Brent, and I are members of the American Institute of Certified Planners, so you kind of have a planning powerhouse in the room today. And for those of you who don't know, I was a city planner by training and the planning director for the city of Troy before I moved into the city manager's office in 2009. So, those of you who know me, I have two big interests: fly fishing for trout and also ice hockey. And so there are two books that I've read and I found quotes that help provide us some insight. One, this is from Norman McLean, who wrote A River Runs Through It and Other Stories. And his father was a Baptist minister and taught him and his brother how to fly fish, how to cast, like a Marine drill sergeant. And this is how he described his father. And after this is insightful to lead us on our road of a planning process. My father was very certain about certain matters pertaining to the universe. All good things, trout as well as eternal salvation, come by grace, and grace comes by art, and art does not come easy. And what I take away from that is that we have a process here that we're going to have to work hard on to solve it. So then I go to the next thing that I really like is hockey. And I love the name of this book. It's called Of Ice and Men, and obviously it's a parody on another book. But, Steve Yzerman came as an 18-year-old to Detroit and won all sorts of records and scoring and everything, but it took him many, many years to win the Stanley Cup. So in this book, there's a chapter, and then there's a quote from Steve Yzerman. It's, "I've been through it all. After you go through everything, you learn to deal with failure and not fall apart." And I don't want to say that we necessarily have failed, but you have to recognize that both a master plan and a zoning ordinance are imperfect. Both of these documents were total rewrites when they were done in 2008 and 2012. And you always, and the nature of planning is that it's imperfect and you have to always tweak them. So it's not that we've done anything wrong, it's just that it's part of the process and you learn from what happens. So now I want to invite up Ben Carlisle. Thank you very much.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. I apologize. I don't have an inspirational quote to start my presentation. My name is Ben Carlisle with Carlisle Wortman Associates. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, but not everyone. We are the planning consultant for the city. We've been involved with the city for at least probably 20 years. And so any failures, you can blame on us. But City Manager Miller is correct. Planning and zoning is just as much art as it is in science, and it's not perfect. But the great thing about it is working with the community, you can amend and change it to address common issues. And that's kind of what this whole discussion tonight is going to start. But before we talk about zoning, the foundation of zoning is planning, and that is based around the master plan. Director Savedon and I have recognized through doing this for a number of years that we have our own vernacular, we have our own terminology, we have our own language. And oftentimes we use it a lot, and it's not always common to the people who don't do this every day. So some of this may be rudimentary to a lot of people in this audience, but we always think it's important to have an education opportunity when we do this so that we're all on the same page and moving forward. So I apologize again if some of this is elementary, but it is worth refreshing for everybody. So why do we plan? Planning for a city really is no different than why you plan for anything, whether that be financial planning, family planning, or any other reason. You plan to anticipate change. You know things are going to change. You have to anticipate that change. And based on anticipating that change, you hopefully can create some predictability moving forward. Though not perfect, that's the intent. Troy, like most municipalities, in fact, all the municipalities we work with, has a limited number of resources, both fiscal, physical, natural, etc. So you plan to use those most efficiently and most wisely for your community. You plan for a community to create a vision. The whole intent of the master plan is to create a vision and then enact goals and policies and strategies to fulfill that vision. And that's what the planning document is all about. And lastly, you use it to protect both the physical environment, the built environment, and most importantly, the quality of life for your residents. You buy into the city, you invest in the city, you live in the city for a reason, and the part of the master plan process is to protect your quality of life in the city. So planning is a great idea, and we don't do it just because it's a good idea. It's actually state law. There are a state statute, it's the Michigan Plan Enabling Act. It was adopted, it was actually revised in 2008, and that's the statutory requirement under which why we do planning and how we do planning. So everything we do is built on state statute. What the Michigan Enabling Act states is that the master plan is a policy document. Again, I'm going to talk a lot about policy document versus legal documents, and I'll talk about the legal document in a second. The master plan is a policy document that describes the physical development of community. It really focuses on the built environment. What a master plan describes is where the city has been. So in all master plans, and including the Troy master plan, we talk about demographics and background. That's all the where you've been. It also talks about where a city wants to go. That's the visioning aspect of the master plan. That's the goals aspect of the master plan. You take those two parts together, and that's how the city plans to get there. And that's through the strategies and the actions that are in the master plan. So all master plans are built around these three fundamental aspects: where you've been, where you want to go, and then how do you get there. Most importantly, and I'm actually going to look at the city attorney for this one, is the master plan provides the statutory base for your zoning ordinance. You have to have a plan in order to zone. And I'll talk about the connection between those two in a second. But from a legal standpoint, the master plan is essential to build your statutory foundation for zoning. Typically with a master plan, we look 20 years into the future. That's the ultimate time frame of when we look at a master plan. But the state's enabling statute requires us to look at the master plan every 5 years. It does not mean you need to amend the master plan every 5 years. It doesn't mean you need to make any changes to it. But what it simply says is you need to review it to ensure that it's still consistent with your city's goals and visions, etc. We last updated our master plan in 2016, and so it's time for the city to start thinking about an update to the master plan moving forward. So there is a direct connection, but there's a significant difference between your master plan and your zoning ordinance. So now I'm going to start talking about zoning. Your master plan, as I noted, is the policy document. It's your vision, it's your goals, it's your strategies. It's not law, it is a policy document. The zoning ordinance is the document that actually codifies your master plan. So basically the goals and strategies of your master plan then get codified in regulations in your zoning ordinance. So there is a direct connection, but there is a significant difference between the two documents. I kind of briefly went over this, but there are some essential items that go in the master plan. We talk a lot about population, we focus a lot on land use, we deal with issues of transportation, infrastructure, housing, natural features. The master planning process is evolving as we kind of evolve as a society, so we're dealing with a lot of social issues, social justice, and other things that go into a master plan that have traditionally not gone into master plans before. But in the end, you really have three components. You have your goals, your policies, and then your future land use plan, again, which zoning is based upon. This is very repetitive, and I apologize, but it's important to keep stressing that your future land use plan is the basis under which we make zoning decisions. This is your future land use plan, and what this does, it signifies in not necessarily a parcel by parcel, but an area by area basis in terms of what the future land use is going to be. For this example, all the yellow areas you see up there, that's all residential, single family residential. Big Beaver is the red line, et cetera. So it distinguishes by different areas what the future land uses of those parts of the city are going to be. The area that we're going to spend a lot of time focusing on tonight, and we'll go to much more in depth here in a second about the history of them, is these neighborhood nodes, which are these major intersections. And those are highlighted in kind of the light blue color. And there are reasons why they are signified on the future land use plan, which we'll get into in a second. So I built up the master plan, and that leads again into the zoning ordinance. Why do we zone? Well, the most important reason we zone is, one, is to protect property values. You buy into a community, you invest in a community, you invest into your house. Zoning is necessary to ensure property values and consistency. It protects natural resources, prevents nuisances, so we talk a lot about odors, blight, noxious weeds, etc. Those are nuisance issues that are dealt with in the zoning ordinance. It ensures land use compatibility, and you'll hear a lot about land use compatibility tonight and transition. So the zoning ordinance is intended to ensure land use compatibility. And lastly, it ensures, and especially we deal with this when we look at developments, is can a future use be provided with services? And that's everything from water, sewer, etc., but schools, police, fire, and other services as well. So what is zoning? Zoning is the law. This comes directly again from the Zoning Enabling Act, which was adopted in 2008. And it's an exercise of municipal police power to regulate the use of land. The fundamental basis of zoning is a police power offered by the state to local municipalities. The key fundamentals of zoning is, first and foremost, it's a protection of public health, safety, and welfare. And you'll hear planners and planning commission and city council use that term a lot. Protection of public health, safety, and welfare, because that's the basis under which we make zoning decisions. And lastly, zoning has to advance a legitimate government purpose. And the best way I can describe this is, we cannot in a zoning ordinance say that you can't paint your house red. That does not advance any legitimate government purpose. But what we can say is your house can only be this height, your house has to be this far set back from a property line. That's an advancement of a legitimate government purpose. So all the regulations in the zoning ordinance have to have a legitimate government purpose into why we enact those laws. There's two parts to a zoning ordinance. We often only look at the text of a zoning ordinance, which is actually the language. There's two parts. The first is the map. The map, you'll see, actually divides the city into different zoning districts. It looks similar to a future land use map, but it's different. The future land use map should be the basis for that zoning map, but they are different. So it actually divides the city into different districts. Based on those districts, that's where the text comes into play. And within those districts, you have different regulations that define issues of lot size, building placement, building orientation, height, etc. So every district has its own unique, specific regulations based upon that district. Similar to master plans, we don't do this just because it's a good idea. It's actually a fundamental state statute that we base our decisions on. This is from 2006. And again, I talk about the zoning ordinance really based upon a plan. That plan is the master plan, which is designated to promote the public health, safety, and general welfare. So again, I apologize for repeating this, but it's very, very important. The policies in your master plan are implemented through the development applications established in the zoning ordinance. So when you have a development in front of you that we are reviewing, we review that based on the zoning ordinance, which was based upon the master plan. Okay. I'm going to hand it off here to Dick Carlisle, who's going to talk about the history of planning.
See, they bring the old guy up to talk about history, you know. Which is the advancement button here. Okay. Well, I appreciate having the opportunity. We've worked with the city on a regular basis for about 20 years. But I'll talk about some involvement I had, particularly in relationship to some of the issues you're dealing with now that actually go back to the mid-'80s. So this was the future land use plan in 1965. And as you can see from the future land use plan, south of Big Beaver along the Maple Corridor, that's probably, you see a lot of gray on that map. That's where a lot of the industrial development was and still is from that standpoint. Different today as it is. But the rest of the city was predominantly single-family residential development. But notice at all of these key intersections, on your mile roads, a lot of the red there, and those are now what we call the nodes, but a lot of property that was master planned at that point in time for commercial development. This was a land use plan in 2002. Something happened between 1965 and 2002, in addition to all the growth and development that occurred. If you notice, in 65, there was no Kmart headquarters, there was no Somerset, for example, along Bee Beaver. A lot of the office development hadn't been done to a great extent. Obviously, by 2002, a great deal more had happened. In the mid-'80s, the city took upon itself to do a commercial market analysis for the city, and I think there was something in the neighborhood of 78 different properties that were slated for rezoning. And as you might imagine, as the city proceeded with that, there were quite a few legal challenges to rezoning of those properties. And that was my first involvement with the city as an expert witness on behalf of the city, and I think in at least 5 or 6 cases. So in 2002, the city began to think a little differently about what to do about some of these key areas, and you can see that some of these areas that were very rigidly designated now were a little bit more generally designated for commercial development. You see, obviously, the Big Beaver corridor filling out quite a bit, Kirks Road area to the north and Northland, that whole area developing. But up until this point, the city's master plan was predominantly a map. There was some written policy behind it, but not extensively. Something very remarkable happened in 2005, and that was the whole Troy Futures effort. And that was really largely a citizen-based effort. There was over 170 people involved. Anybody here that was involved in that? I'm sure quite a few people were, yeah. The Troy Futures was a pretty remarkable effort. There were about seven committees or task force that developed, that it really studied the city, its fabric, the type of community that it was and wanted to become, and really developed some remarkable ideas surrounding that entire idea. And essentially, this is what came out of the Troy Futures effort. There was a large recommendation to rewrite the future land use plan, to build in flexibility and efficiency that makes redevelopment in Troy attractive, implement a villaging development concepts to create connected sense of place and community with a variety of activity nodes, and to offer a variety of housing options. So, as you can see, some of the things we talk about today really were emanated from the citizen-based Troy Futures effort in 2006. So we did, collectively, the 2008 master plan, and this was by far the most comprehensive master plan that the city had ever undertaken. A lot of effort was put into this, but we were fortunate at the time to be able to borrow a great deal upon the work of the Troy Futures Group in developing this plan. And quite a few people that were involved in Troy Futures were involved in the public participation that we had to develop this plan. The orientation became quite different, though. It became more an investment in redevelopment, because think about what was going on in 2008. We were right in the midst, the recession at that point in time was occurring, and there was quite a bit less happening in Troy than there may be today. And so from the standpoint of the Planning Commission and the council's direction is that we need to look at areas that we can promote investment and redevelopment. The office vacancy rates on Big Beaver were something in the nature of 28%, Mark, something like that? Probably like that, maybe 30%, about 30%. And there was a real decline in tax base, and I think the city was concerned. Industrial along Maple was empty. The city experienced severe budget cuts. I think a large number of city employees the workforce was reduced. So you can imagine, at the time, what a planning commission and city council and city management staff were thinking about the direction of the city in the future. At that time, the master plan main goals were to rebound from the recession, to look at a mix of housing option because as documented in the plan, demographics were changing and still are, to promote infill development and provide for a density and intensity in appropriate places, and then finally focus on some of our major corridors. So there was actually a fair amount of study done of all of these areas as well as the neighborhood nodes in conjunction with that plan. I'll go on to the neighborhood nodes, which is next, right? But let me just say that there was a revision to this plan in 2016. It was not a major rewrite, but as we'll talk about later, the stage is set because we are at the point where the master plan does need to be updated, that there's opportunity here to again revisit many of these issues. And as Ben suggests, the place to start is changing your policies or amending your policies in the master plan. Okay.
Yeah, really quick. Can you talk about when you came to me in 2006 and said, Mark, wasn't it, were you open to doing a non-traditional plan, and a little bit about why this was so special?
Well, yeah, most of the, even some that I've done, believe it or not, I find that hard to believe, were pretty boring documents. There was sort of a formula for doing a master plan where you did a lot of background studies and very little analysis, and then your conclusion section maybe 20 pages at the most. This plan really borrowed from the work of Troy Futures, and it was very thematic based. In other words, each one of the sections of this plan can literally stand alone, and a lot of this was really drawn from the work of the Troy Futures Group, such as the context from local to global, because we were in the midst of promoting a global economy, and Troy was and still is right in the middle of that. A place to learn and play, the quality of life of Troy, very important. A place of prosperity. So each one of these chapters really tells a story about the city of Troy. And of course we know, as a lot of stories, that changes and that evolves over time, and that's obviously what we need to consider with future updates. Okay.
Thanks, Dick. I noticed some of you taking notes. That's good. We've got a really lengthy test we're going to be handing out at the end of this, so keep taking good notes. So I'm going to talk about neighborhood nodes, and the reason it's taken us half an hour to get to this point is it was important just to remind everybody that this neighborhood node concept, it wasn't created in a vacuum. We didn't just arrive at this one day out of thin air and decide we're going to do this neighborhood node. Some of you in the audience didn't hear about neighborhood nodes until there was literally a application for a development in your backyard. I saw a hand go up over there. And we get that, but it was important to tell a story, provide a narrative of how we got to where we did regarding the neighborhood nodes. So, as Ben indicated, first you plan, right? You create your policy document, which our master plan in 2008 recognized this concept of neighborhood nodes, and it was in a response to market conditions of the midst of the recession. And it was also important to recognize that there were existing conditions that we had to respect with these nodes. They were at 21 intersections located at major intersections throughout the city, and each node that was classified in the master plan had a description. This is node A in the southeast corner at 14 in DeQuinder, and it provides a description of the primary use and character. And we've got one of these for each of the nodes in our master plan. And the vision for this concept was, again, that they'd be located at major mile roads. The master plan recognized that each one of these has a unique characteristic, and the intent was to provide neighborhood gathering places, that villaging concept. I talk with my hands, so I keep doing this with the microphone. The villaging concept that was identified in the Futures 2020 in 2005 accommodating the daily needs of residents, and also permitting a mix of uses, commercial, office, and residential. So we had the vision, so we implemented it in the zoning ordinance. Policy is implemented through zoning, as we know. So there's 21 nodes, and 20 of the nodes back up to single-family residential neighborhoods. So we have a section in the zoning ordinance that contemplates this, and it talks about visually distinguishing the nodes from the abutting areas because of their intensity, their density, and their design. And the ordinance also has design techniques such as variation of building height to further differentiate them from the residential neighborhoods, and also respecting those neighbors. One of the tenets of the master plan was protection of single-family residential property values. So one of the ways that I describe zoning is it's a balance of property rights, and this section of the zoning ordinance tries to get at that balance of property rights, balancing the rights of the developers to develop a property, but also the rights of the neighbors to not have that property negatively impact their single-family properties. So the zoning ordinance, each one of the nodes has a description, an illustration that clearly defines the boundaries of each node, and has specific use and building type regulations associated with them. It's based on site type and street type that the properties front on. And there's a set of design standards that talks about orientation, access, parking, and transitional features such as limiting intensity, height, massing, and orientation. I'm going to give you some examples. Because I know, again, some of you started to get involved with the nodes with one specific project, and there's a slide up here for that project. I saved it the best for last. It's the last slide that I'm going to provide. But I walk you through a little bit of a history here, and also keep in mind the different types of uses and the scale and the height, and just these are all there's a lot of differentiation here. This is our first one. This is the gas station, the Kroger gas station on Rochester Road. The building's located in the front. Most gas stations, you've got the parking or the canopy and the pumps at the front and the buildings at the back, and it really doesn't relate to the street. Our neighborhood node requires that the building have a relationship with Rochester Road, so that's what you have. You have the building in front and the gas station behind. It's a different look. The Kroger gas station was concerned when we first met with them and talked about this project, but it's very successful. This is the corner of Crooks and Waddles, 7-Eleven. Ben and I call this the nicest 7-Eleven in suburban North America. And we tongue-in-cheek, it is really nice. But most of the suburban 7-Elevens and other not to pick on 7-Elevens, but convenience stores that you see in suburban areas, it's got a parking lot in front, the building's at the back, it's not inviting, and this, I think, is really nice. It's got quality materials, it's got an entryway that's focused on the intersection. It's a really nice 7-Eleven. And this is the office building just to the south of it on Crooks Road. All quality design, the building is pulled up to the Crooks Road. It relates to the road. You can see in the windows, you can see out. It has that strong relationship with Crooks Road. This is Haldane Townhomes at Livernois and Square Lake. To be fair, there's mixed reviews on this. Wow, maybe not so mixed. 43 units. Apparently, everyone knows where this is located. It's at Livernois and Square Lake Road. Three stories in height. They're condominiums. This is a project that's under construction. This is a rendering that was provided by the applicant. 27 units on the south side of Long Lake, just west of Livernois. Many of you will remember that the first application we had for this site was a mammoth storage building that went before City Council, was denied, and I think we'd all agree this is a better project than what was denied. Sometimes the process works, right? This is East Maple Plaza, Maple Road, south side of Maple Road, just west of DeQuinder. This was approved by the Planning Commission. I don't think construction started, but it is a multi-tenant building, quality materials with brick and glass and an outdoor This isn't working here. There's an outdoor seating area, gathering place in front of the building, parking at the side and at the rear, not in front of the building. The building relates to Maple Road. This is a office building, medical office building located at the corner of Square Lake and DeQuinder. Some of you may remember there was a proposal long ago for a drugstore with a drive-through. The neighbors didn't like it. Then there was an application for a Tim Hortons with a drive-through. The neighbors didn't like it. Both kind of went away for various reasons. And this is a by right development, a medical office building. Numerous neighbors showed up and they're okay with it. It was a very productive meeting.
Brent, could you take a minute and just refresh everyone's memory what it means to be a by right?
Sure. Did I say that we could ask questions? I don't remember. Weird. Sure. So a by right development is a development that is permitted at essentially, if it's permitted in that zoning district, it's permitted at essentially any location in the zoning district. It is, if you meet the minimum requirements of the zoning district, we'll recommend approval, and you'll likely, in all likelihood, receive approval by the Planning Commission. This is different than a special use, which may or may not be appropriate at every property in the zoning district. So there are additional standards associated with special use, as well as there's a public hearing that's required for special uses. So it's a higher bar, it's a higher standard of approval. Pardon me? Discretion. Yeah, there's more discretion by the Planning Commission based on the special use standards that are included in the zoning ordinance. So this was by right, not a special use. This was another by right development. It was located, recently approved by Planning Commission, located on the south side of Square Lake, just west of DeQuinder. This is 14 units. And then, like I said, I saved the best for last. I say this is the project that many of you in the room became engaged with the notion of neighborhood nodes because of this. It's close proximity to your homes. 72 units on 5 acres, I think. What was that? 74. I was close. And we've listened to, Planning Commission literally has listened to hours of concern and comments from many of the people in the audience, because this is in close proximity to their neighborhood. This is located obviously on the west side of Crooks Road, just north of Waddles Road. So we've heard from some of you in the room, and as well as from some other projects, some of the issues associated with neighborhood nodes. This is just a snapshot. We've heard for some nodes that density is an issue. We've heard height is a potential issue. Traffic, the amount of traffic generated by some of these projects is a concern. The buffer or the transition, that relationship between projects and the neighborhoods that back up to these projects are a potential issue. And so the question that we have is, are current developments meeting the vision and intent of the neighborhood nodes? And the way that we're going to address this question is with a facilitated discussion that is going to be led by Ben and Dick Carlisle. So with that, I'll hand the microphone over to those two.
Thank you. Again, I apologize for the length of that presentation, but I think it was important to establish at least a baseline so that we could have a facilitated discussion. I want to assure the public that we're going to start the discussion with the City Council and the Planning Commission, but there is an opportunity at the end for public to comment based on the discussion they heard from this body. And we're going to ask the Planning Commission and the City Council 3 pointed questions. And we're going to ask you to respond to these questions. And what I'm going to do is hand a series of sticky notes to every single member. We want you to write your response on that sticky note. If you've got multiple responses to the question, that's great. That's perfectly acceptable. But please put your individual response on one individual note card. So for example, question 1, what's your vision of the neighborhood nodes? And if it may be walkable and mixed use, please put walkable on one card, mixed use on the other card. We're going to give you 3 minutes to respond to each of these questions, and then we're going to have a facilitate. Excuse me, please, respect.
That's 2 strikes,
That's
Karen.
2, yeah, that's 2 and you're out, Karen. Yeah. No, give her a whole ream of And then we're going to have a facilitated discussion after each question. So we're going to start with this first one. What is your vision of the neighborhood nodes?
One adjective per piece of paper, right?
Yes. Can you hand?
Actually, Ben, just to clarify, is it one adjective or is it a statement of what our vision is?
It can be both, but if it's one statement, one sheet, and then if
Gotcha.
it's another statement, another sheet. It doesn't have to be an adjective.
So we can turn it a few sheets per class.
You can turn in as many sheets as you want. Mind you, only have 3 minutes, so how much can you write in 3 minutes? And we'll start collecting them as you start finishing them up.
Blue and yellow, really? Get out of here.
It's maize and blue, those people.
I'm willing to bet people in the public would also have their own thoughts. Please write them down on your paper and feel free to email us later or something. I mean, I don't think this is going to be the exact opportunity, but I'm very curious what some of you are thinking as well. I'm sure all of us are, but.
One more minute.
Wait, what?
I gotta rewrite it, or does it make sense? I almost got this done, I just wanted to write it so you could read it.
Careful. Let's not let that be used against us.
We follow the laws.
Who's going to need more sheets for the next question?
Depends on the next question.
Okay, I'll just throw it back. Not going to read everyone. Obviously, we will record everyone and have it for record. But there were kind of three themes that kind of arose from this. And the first theme was compatibility. And we talk a lot about that at the Planning Commission and City Council level. Is develop in partnership with the neighborhood, seamless integration to adjacent properties, fits the neighborhood, complements the surrounding neighborhood, promotes reasonable development. So that's the first kind of the common theme with consistency with the neighborhood. The second was a village within a city, quaint, social interaction, walkable, 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 walkable. It's the second theme, so a lot of walking. The third is mixed use, vibrant, local shopping and services. Now we're talking about specific uses per se within these nodes. Services within walking distance, aesthetically appealing, unique development, not cookie cutter development. So those are kind of common three themes. There were a couple that said, should we review if we even need neighborhood nodes, if they were the right decision in the first place? So that comment was also added. So there were, like I said, three common themes, but one or two comments about the question about should we have neighborhood nodes in the first place.
So, I thought it was interesting that a couple people actually mentioned sort of the quaint or village within a city. And, that was a concept that came out of the Troy Futures. A city of villages was a very prominent concept. And so a lot of what the neighborhood nodes were envisioned as areas there that would be a focus of activity within that neighborhood and not, necessarily citywide. So the real challenge and the question comes for you is, you have this whole array of concerns about protecting nearby residences and providing compatibility, which we should be doing. And yet, at the same time, we also have a lot of expression of potential development intensity, obviously greater than the neighborhood. So from your perspective, and some of you that wrote some of these comments maybe on both sides, how do you think that can best be achieved, or how do you feel that we can overcome some of these sort of naturally conflicting potential issues that we have seen happen? Karen.
Well, I'll start with saying my observation.
Can you talk into the mic, please?
Sorry. My observation has been with what I have heard at public hearings from residents as it pertains to the neighborhood nodes is not objections around the idea that we could have a neighborhood node that included a coffee shop, a bookstore, a dry cleaner, a nail salon, things where the residents and the people that drive to Troy to work would come and use. It primarily has to do with housing. It primarily has to do with dense housing, and dense housing that comes with height. I think that if you looked at a neighborhood node and you wanted to do single-story cottage homes, 1,000, 1,200 square foot cottage homes, you would not be met with the type of resistance that we're seeing with, 1,200 square foot townhomes that are 3 stories.
Good comments. Here?
Thanks, Dick. Exactly what Karen just said in a sense. I mean, obviously all the Post-its weren't read, but nobody said housing or dense housing as how they envision those. And so I think the disconnect for me and for others, I'm assuming, is, we tend to be getting these housing proposals where the idea and the vision of a neighborhood node is more of a place where the existing neighborhood's to use for services or to gather. And I mean, I think I saw a solutions one over there or something, but I don't know, that is the disconnect. Definitely, it's people are uncomfortable with extreme dense tall housing. And not everybody likes the 7-Eleven, and not everybody likes the driveway, and there's issues with all of that. And but I think that the housing probably is the biggest concern.
So do you think that it's one of these issues that it's not a matter of whether a neighborhood node should have perhaps, obviously, potentially more dense development than the surrounding neighborhoods. It's a matter of degree and to what extent that is permitted. Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I would agree with that point, and.
Use the mic.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that point, but I'd also say your first question about compatibility. I think if it's housing, and if it's dense housing, then it needs to be constructed in a way that maybe is denser at the perimeter of the node, or at the road.
Okay.
And then when
Then
it's
adjacent to the
closer
neighborhood, yeah.
to the single-family residential, it's more in line with the single-family residential.
Okay.
That was one thing. The second thing is, I thought housing and multifamily housing or denser housing was in the language for the nodes as it exists currently. I thought,
Yeah.
that was anticipated
Yes.
in the
Not-
current language for the nodes.
Not uniformly across all the nodes, because the descriptions in the master plan are varied for each node.
Right,
But yes,
understood.
I mean, quite honestly, the master plan did anticipate higher density development of whatever that might be in the node areas, because in many of these cases, we're dealing with properties that at one point in time were zoned commercial or something non-residential, as you could see from the history of the master plan as well as the zoning litigation that I talked about. These areas traditionally were areas of higher density development.
Thank you.
Ron?
You know, we can't overlook the economics of this project or of this issue, because what we hear is on the Planning Commission from developers, we need to have this level of density to make the project viable. On the other hand, the first word that I thought of was compromise, a compromise between what the developer may want as far as a higher density and maybe what the neighborhood surrounding may want as far as lower density. But one of the foundational issues is that financial, that economic gain or not. And if the developer doesn't feel he can get out of that what he wants to, and I'm not here to say he can't, or what he should get out, but that's a huge issue that we always hear on the Planning Commission. And quite honestly, that's not our purview, at least that's not my purview, to know if what we're hearing is really what is the reality of the situation.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
The one that I feel like at the moment, the zoning ordinance we don't have is the connection between master plan and the zoning ordinance with respect to neighborhood nodes. So with respect to neighborhood nodes. For example, if we consider the density, then there is no cap. Like how many units you want to make out of 1 acre. So there is no cap. So you can come up with like 20 or 25, or I have seen 17. So that's another issue that we need to really consider, because you're abutting a single family residential area, and you cannot just have so highly dense,
Correct.
units without giving any provision for social interaction. We speak about social interaction should be there, but we don't see anything. So these are the things that's where I think is the gaps, so we need to incorporate in the zoning ordinance.
Good point. Edna?
One of the other things that we hear about with concerns with density is the traffic impact. In a lot of cases, traffic studies are done even when they're not required, and they usually come back with, it's 5 extra trips in the morning rush hour, 4 extra trips in the evening rush hour. But just like all politics are local, all traffic is local. So even if you do a traffic study that doesn't produce a 1 mile backup, which would be significant to a traffic engineer, the reality for most people, if they're leaving their subdivision at 6:30 in the morning, and it used to only take them, they only paused at the stop sign because there was no traffic, and now they're waiting 5 minutes. To them, that's their reality. It's not a 1 mile backup, which you'd be hearing on the news, but it's something very local, it's something real, and it's something that they experience on a regular basis. And I think that is also one of the concerns with the neighborhood node. Maybe traditional housing would still have an impact, but not as much as perhaps neighborhood node when you start getting into the dense townhouse situation.
So people experience a difference that's a change for them.
Yes.
I was going to mention too that we talk about with the neighborhood nodes offering something that's an amenity to people in the existing neighborhood, like a 7-Eleven or a coffee shop, but also, why can't we get a developer to come in, maybe a 7-Eleven isn't feasible, but maybe a park or some other type of green space that offers something to the people in the adjoining neighborhood.
A quid pro quo, something that's
No, don't say quid pro quo.
not a good time to use that, is it?
Never a good time, Dave.
It was not a perfect word, I tell you. Yes.
Just to go off a little bit of what Ms. Abraham said about the traffic, one of the things that I looked at too in the zoning ordinance was they talked about the major arterial streets, because I noticed all of the nodes are at an intersection where those exist. But I was the one who made the comment about maybe reviewing whether all of the neighborhood nodes should still be neighborhood nodes, because my concern is that not all of these major arterial streets are the same. So for example, I actually called the engineering department today because they define it as a 120-foot street. And I know, for example, Waddles is not that wide, but it also says it's a right-of-way width, which Waddles is. But what that means, and if you start reading the master plan, it talks about how the roads can have the potential to be widened and to take care of all this traffic. But I guess the part that I have difficulty with is what comes first, really? Do we build it and then wait till Waddles is backed up from Crooks to Coolidge before we decide to widen the road? Or do we revisit it and decide that maybe this was not the intent for this, and maybe this is not a great location?
You don't want to build in self-fulfilling prophecies, is what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of points already covered, but one of the biggest issues is a lot of these neighborhoods aren't that walkable. When you talk about like McClure or Alpine, they're very thin, small roads without sidewalks. There's kids walking down them, and then you want to go right to the residential at the end. And I know that's not a neighborhood node, that's Big Beaver Corridor. But the issue is, if our intent is to be walkable, if these neighborhoods aren't already walkable, increasing the traffic there is just kind of not really getting us to where we want to be. And that can be true in the nodes as well.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, no.
I think the density question is one person's appropriate density is another one's nightmare density, it seems, based on the projects that are coming forward. When you read the language, like the Crooks Road and Waddles Road, development at this location should be low impact and provide a high benefit to the neighborhood using the least amount of land. When I read the rest of that description, never in my mind's eye, when I was approving this as a council member the last time we revisited the plan, did I think that invited, when I look at the portal at that intersection, there's a lot of apartments being brought forward there. This language and what's coming, I'm surprised that our planning and our zoning is inviting that. And I think something needs to be fixed, because I think my word up there is logical. And I don't know how you zoning ordinance logic, some of this is subjective, but I think at the end of the day, whether it's that node or any other development, our ability to, whatever the traffic engineering report says, as Councilwoman Abraham said one time, it's maybe with this project, it only means this, but when we're looking at a future plan, it's death by 1,000 cuts. All of a sudden, we are backed up a mile on the road. How do we get at that? That's the concern I think residents are bringing to us.
I've got one whenever.
Go ahead, Tom.
Two words probably summarize it all. It's compatibility and transition between single-family residents and whatever other development that's coming next to them. To just follow up with Mr. Lambert's comments about that transition, I'll go right to Dick Carlisle, the historian. Institutional history, back in 2005, you were part of helping the city with the Monarch project. And one of the things for that transition between the large tower apartments or condominiums and the single-family homes were two-story high townhouses, two-story high. They're actually lower than was required for the R1B district that's in. So here we had a transition. In addition to that, the council passed that there had to be a buffer equal to the width of a property of those single-family homes. There was 120 foot that was to be bought by the developer, but owned by the city of Troy and developed as parkland. So that was an adequate transition that the council approved back in 2006. We're not having that now. We're talking 30 feet, 40 feet, maybe 50 feet, and what can you put in there? Some of it has such little space, maybe 10 feet in some cases at the original proposal we saw. It's not the transition we need between single-family, residential, and whatever other development's coming in.
Dick, I have a quick comment for the group, and I want, Dick, you to expand upon a subject I'm going to get to in a second. So the real sticking point, the real hard problem that everyone in this room is going to have to solve is how do we deliver different housing options in relation to the D word? And Dick just recently had an article published in Planning and Zoning News that sort of addresses the need for housing for the aging population. And we're really not delivering it. Many communities aren't really delivering it. And so I know we're not gonna solve it tonight, but Dick, can you kind of educate us a little bit about this issue?
Well, it's nothing unique to Troy. This is happening all over the country, but the state of Michigan, Michigan is now the 12th oldest state in the country. So average ages are rising, life expectancy is increasing. It's a good thing for some of us, But the fact of the matter is that where the transitions are really beginning we're not talking about people that are 85, not talking about 75. We're talking about transitions in people's lives that start at 55 and 60 when they become empty nesters and their desires and their style of housing. The question is, do you want to try to appeal to that market to keep those folks in the city of Troy who already live here? You're going to see that over the next 20 years, that close to 35 to 40% of your population is going to be over 55. And it may even happen sooner than that. And so what is that also going to do to the rest of the housing market that exists? So this is a reality. This is what's happening out there. The housing community, the developers have slowly responded to it, but not to the extent that needs to be to really deal with this complete change. They call it the silver tsunami, and it is really upon us.
Dick, you and I have had some discussions. I have some personal experience in it. And one of the things that you expose in that article is that the idea of living independently can also create isolation. And I have some family members who made that decision where they think they're independent, but it makes them isolated. So we want to try to create, if we decide, places where people live where they can have things that they can do as when they have mobility issues. And we're not really delivering that product now, but I think that it's a lofty goal we should address in the next rendition of the master plan.
Mark, just to follow up on that, out of turn, but I think that we're not dealing with it because what that housing stock is not 2- and 3-story townhomes, which are consistently getting proposed and built in the city. And I think that even the residents would say, okay, maybe I don't love that there's increased density, but hey, these are stacked condos where I could live if I have knee replacement surgery, and I can take an elevator up to my single level place, or single story cottages and such. I think that at least some people would feel like we're getting something for this increase in density or the change to the woods that are no longer there and such, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that can be addressed in this aspect from a legal standpoint. I know what I could wave a few magic wands, which we can't do, but again, how do you encourage developers to develop those kind of properties, which are what we want and need? Whatever we've been doing is not working in that respect. So if we can focus on that, or, I mean, I've asked people in the community development people, and, you know, they always say it's about, listen, you build up, it's cheaper for them and they make more money from it, but there must be some solution.
You know, that's a really great point. And back to Mr. Tagle's point, I think we need to understand more about the economics and to try to be able to address that and better understand and understand what that motivation is. Because I've had it explained to me that one of the reasons why we see townhouse developments, they are so much less expensive to build, frankly, for the cost of the land and all the infrastructure costs. You know, going vertical is always less expensive than going horizontal. Question is that really fulfilling a long-term need
Dick.
in the city? And that's the real question. Yeah.
So I just, to your point, Mayor Baker, one of the things that the Planning Commission did in response to your comment was to come up with our cluster zoning ordinance, right? And so through our cluster zoning ordinance, we tried to come up with a way that encouraged developers to build denser homes, right? And that they would get rewarded for these smaller communities that allowed for some density. And, you know, short of giving tax abatements, right, to developers, you do have to incent at some level to encourage the behavior that you're looking for. It's human nature that money talks. But even with the cluster zoning ordinance that encouraged the preservation of green space, as a planning commission, we have had tremendous pushback as to what the cluster zoning really looks like once it's developed.
Right.
So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
One more quick comment. The other aspect of this, there's a lot of people in this community who feel like, well, you know what? I don't care that the developers aren't making as much money. We feel like the city's favoring the developers all the time and no one's listening to us. So hold on, guys. But I mean, I think that is a very valid concern, having just come off an election season. That was out there. I mean, you hear that plenty. And the cluster ordinance, I think it's done great things. I don't think it's having the full effect of what people are still kind of waiting to see what happens. And you know, you see clusters, but you still see huge colonial houses going up in the cluster footprint. So it's, how much of an incentive are we wanting to give? Are we willing to give? And again, how much do we care about the developer's bottom line versus our residents, who at this point are paying 2/3 of our taxes anyway?
Okay, we'll move on. No, thank you. And we, I want to make one comment. We all kind of made one comment. It's really refreshing to actually have elected and appointed officials actually read what you write from a planning standpoint. They actually read the master plan zoning ordinance. I see people actually have copies here. We go to so many communities where they don't even read what we write. So it's refreshing and scary at the same time, especially when you ask those questions. What do you mean by that? What do I mean by that? So I appreciate the commitment everyone has made tonight. We've kind of got to this. We've spent some time on this, but really focus. We're going to do the same exercise. This time I'm going to give you 2 minutes, because we talked a lot about this, is as currently developed, what are your key concerns related to the neighborhood nodes? And if you can be more specific than not, that would be helpful. So for example, if you say density, what about density does that mean? Is it traffic? Is it height, et cetera? So as specific as you can would be very helpful for this answer.
Another round. For sure, for sure. Pencils down, please.
Okay, so none of these are not something that's already somewhat come up, but it's a little bit more specific. There's really a couple common themes. There's the loss of green space, trees, curb appeal, failure to protect wetlands, so kind of the green open space aspect that comes up often. Traffic. There's no benefit to the surrounding neighborhood. There's no social aspect to it. There's no community aspect to the new developments being built. There's no social interaction with the new ones that are really being built. And then the fourth one is compatibility. They're not compatible with existing neighborhoods. Too dense, too close, there's no transition, etc. So the four themes were loss of green space, traffic, the nodes that's being developed aren't creating the social environment that we have talked about in the master plan, and lastly, transition, incompatibility, and density issues.
I think the most fascinating point about that was the lack of social interaction, because it kind of contradicts the idea of becoming the village concept or neighborhoods or members of the community. Who expressed that opinion? I'd like a little bit more. Could you expound on that a little bit more in terms? Yeah, well, the idea that the types of developments lack of connectivity to their surrounding neighborhoods and in terms of social connectivity.
Right. I read the master plan before coming here, so I picked up that word.
The whole thing?
The neighborhood node section. So it says this village in a city, right? That's basically the idea that it was thought about. This is like 15 years ago. You guys already thought about it. But then if I see the way the plans are being proposed by the applicants, it's like a urban sprawling in urban sprawling. Like you have like urban sprawling is something that is not good anymore, right? So we want to eliminate that. We want mixed use. But then within the urban sprawling, we are now converting all these small, condos or buildings. That's kind of not like the way it was thought about. So I expect that there will be, as we spoke before, that there should be some small mom and shops, some laundries or some other things that where people can go, interact, and get their work done and come back to their apartments. Those kind of village type environment was expected, the way I thought, but it's not there.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yes, sir, Mayor.
David, you want to go first?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Kind of similar thoughts, but just I think the first priority should always be make sure these nodes are usable and useful to the nearby neighbors and walkable for them, so that when we build a giant housing project that doesn't really help the existing residents at all, the first priority should be something they can use. So kind of the same idea.
Okay. So the irony with the easy storage on Long Lake, when I believe planning unanimously recommended that for approval to the city council, and city council voted it down. But the irony about that project is that it was, for lack of a better word, sold to us as this is great for the surrounding neighborhoods. Studies show that people need storage facilities within 1 mile of them. Look, there's 2,200 square feet of retail on the ground floor. We don't know what it'll be, but it's going to be for the existing neighbors. And that still wasn't enough for most of us on council to approve it. And the irony is it's housing that we ended up approving because that was more compatible to the existing neighbors, right? So, but the idea initially was, And I think that was the last neighborhood node project that, I mean, was somewhat controversial that came to us in that respect. And there was a heavy focus on good for the existing neighbors. And that seems to be gone with, and I won't mention current projects because I don't want to get in any legal trouble, but that doesn't seem to be the focus anymore. And it does appear and feel like it's more about just trying to get some kind of housing and more people in there, which doesn't give any benefit. I can't think of a benefit that it gives to any single-family neighborhood to have new townhomes next to them, honestly.
I want to assure you, too, that I've never seen Lori kick a council person under the table. That I have seen, you know, that I have ever seen.
You can feel the heat from her glare sometimes. It's very tough. But we all serve our roles. Yeah.
Any other thoughts about that? Yes.
The way that I see it is the neighborhood node should enhance the existing neighborhood. It should make it a neighborhood that people want to live in.
Yeah.
Because it's got this great flower shop, bookstore, coffee shop, and they're not, you know, a Starbucks. It might be something local.
Yeah.
And it's got maybe park-like seating behind it, so that once you get your coffee and pick up your book, you can sit outside and then walk back to your house. That, to me, is what we're really trying to get at.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't seen that, and I was thinking exactly of that easy storage facility where it was, oh, we can put in a dry cleaner or something. That's not enhancing the neighborhood. It's not making a destination. To me, that's what we want our neighborhood nodes to be, and I don't think our language gets us there, even though it may have been our intention. Much like the cluster development the first time around, we're looking for smaller homes, and instead we still got the same size homes on a smaller parcel of land, defeating in some ways the preservation of the green space because it doesn't look more open. So I think we can get there. It's just a matter of how do we craft the language to get there.
And that's the third question tonight.
Oh, perfect segue.
So maybe we ought to launch right into that. What do you think? Okay? All right. So solutions, you know, give us some, I mean, it could be as specific or as general as you think, but give us some direction and some solutions. Obviously, the Planning Commission will start working on this.
That was the other question. This piece.
Yep, I'm done.
That's actually for you. But never say that. Holy
See Ellen furiously writing over there.
Oh, jeez.
Okay. So there were actually pretty much three common themes that came out of this one. And the first bucket was engagement. Most of it was focus on engagement between the neighbors and the nodes. But there were a few that said engage the developers as part of this process too, and understand from there in an economic standpoint how they develop each node. So there was engagement on both sides. The second bucket was change the existing zoning of the nodes. So some of them are incentivize local retail, some talk about reducing height and setbacks, which I do want to note the Planning Commission has already undertaken that and has forwarded proposed text amendments to the City Council, which, Brent, do we know when they're taking that up? Okay, so the Planning Commission has put forth language to the City Council that reduces height as well as increases setbacks within the neighborhood nodes. So there was talk, but the second bucket was update the zoning ordinance accordingly based on some of the comments received. And the third was re-look at the master plan. Go through a planning process. And that aligns with engagement, but it's a little bit more intense than just simply engagement. So look at the master plan, review each node individually to craft specific language or regulations for each node. So those were kind of those were the three kind of main categories of comments.
So I'm going to ask the question about your thoughts of whether we should revisit the portion of the master plan, place a priority of revisiting the portion of the master plan regarding the neighborhood nodes first. I mean, we don't necessarily have to do the entire master plan all at once. If this is a priority, is this a high enough priority that this is an area that should be investigated first? I am.
So, I thought you said, I think you said earlier the master plan was last updated in 2016,
That's correct.
and it should be updated every 5 years?
That's correct.
So it's
It's
pretty
time.
much due for an
Yep,
update?
it's
And
time
I
to-
say, so I would recommend looking at the whole master plan because we're talking about the neighborhood nodes, but we have similar conversations around the Big Beaver District, for example. And I think other districts,
Rochester
Rochester
Road.
Road District, and the other point I was gonna make is, I think I heard you say in 2008, one of the factors was the state of the economy.
That's correct.
And my word, not yours, I think the plan encouraged development, which maybe goes to some other comments we made earlier. If the plan is a 20-year plan or a long-term vision, I'm not sure that the current economic situation should be that significant a driver of what the plan is.
Microphone.
When we did the revision of the master plan and crafted these neighborhood nodes, we did our best guess at that time, and we liked the neighborhood node because it gave us flexibility in what was going to go in there with what we wanted to see. Well, this created more problems than I anticipated because we've got developers who go in there, and while the master plan is our guide, the ordinance is what they can do, and there's a quagmire in there. And I think that maybe after all this time, we ought to at least direct our first attention to the neighborhood nodes and start crafting with what we've got available now, after all these years, to see if it doesn't fit more closely with the adjacent areas. And then Carlton's right. I think the Beaver District needs a lot of work also, but I'm more concerned about the neighborhood node right now.
Okay.
If the view of the master plan is 20 years, then Troy's not really going to be growing, it's going to be redeveloping. It's going to be more of a brownfield situation than a greenfield situation, which is very different from how it was in 2008 and in 2016. So I think it's very much worthwhile to relook at it because our 20-year outlook is quite different now than it was in 2005. And that said, I think our neighborhood nodes needs primary attention as we look at the entire master plan because not one of us has a crystal ball that tells us the future with great accuracy. If we did, we'd all be lotto ticket winners, and not sitting here probably. So I think Mr. Hudson's absolutely right. It had a vision, it was crafted, but it didn't quite realize the potential that we thought it might have, and we really need, that I think is our most urgent need out of the whole master plan revisit.
Let me make a observation here, and this is one of the benefits of the revisions to the Planning Act. While we look at things from a long-term view, which we need to do when we plan, it also allows us to be more strategic, okay? Because, you know, we are looking at this now at every 5-year interval, and as Mr. Hudson has, you know, indicated, at that time, conditions were significantly different than they are today. And I think that was the point you were making too, Carlton. So the fact is that even though we're looking at a long-term view, we can also look at a more strategic short-term view, because I don't think, you know, I mean, I think that in this particular case of the issues that we're talking about tonight, the concerns are more immediate from that standpoint.
I want to emphasize the engagement. One of the continuing problems that we're having is we create these plans and the public is either not invited to the table or is invited and doesn't come. And then the plan's created and then all heck breaks loose. We have something like Square Lake in Livernois and people are suddenly paying attention. And so I think one of the keys is as we go forward to address how we are going to revise the neighborhood nodes, we've got to get the public involved. If we need to take it to them, maybe we need to take the meetings to them. One of the things we're constantly, we do invite people. We hold meetings. I too didn't read the entire master plan, but I skimmed what I could, and there were engagement sessions. But if you're reconsidering what to do with a neighborhood node, the key engagement are the people living within the 1 mile radius of that node. And we need to do a better job of engaging those people to understand what's going to be happening there and what's going to be changing so that they can give us a sense of what they want to see in that area so that we don't have this, so we have a proactive approach, not a reactive approach.
Very good point. Here and then there. Sure. Go ahead, Ellen.
I think the nodes really are a priority, and I think part of my concern is, you know, when you hear residents say, oh, I don't want the increased traffic, that can make you think, okay, nobody ever wants. But I think there's a legitimate, often voiced concern about safety. If you think about Crooks Road in Waddles and the 7-Eleven there, one of the things that excited those of us with kids that live near that neighborhood node was, okay, they can ride their bikes, they can get their Slurpee, I can swing in there for coffee. The reality of increased traffic that can come from the by right additional proposals going there starts to negate the very thing that we were talking about, which is that ability to walk and bike ride. And so it just defies logic. It's like we're starting, you could argue that little village sense is starting there, right? There's a dentist, there's a 7-Eleven, there's the potential for other things. You start putting too much traffic at that intersection, whether a traffic engineer says it's the case or not, those driving that intersection know the near misses on an ongoing basis of pedestrians and bike riders that are occurring there. So there's a sense of urgency, I think, in that regard, because we don't want to inadvertently, no one intends to create safety issues in this, with these nodes. And I do think there's a health and safety potential problem. Not just at that node, I'm using it as an example, but at the others.
Thank you. It's kind of a more general point, but I reread the whole master plan the last few weeks, and it very specifically talks about how the plan should be reviewed every year. And I know every 5 years is the major review, but there should be some kind of annual review, kind of maybe of the special area plan goals at the very least. And maybe we need to add more special area plans that have more specific goals for the neighborhood nodes in the Rochester corridor and Big Beaver corridor. But we haven't done that. Since I've joined council, we haven't done any annual reviews of the master plan besides casual discussions. So I would like to add that process because the master plan actually asks for it every year.
Good time to start, isn't it, Mayor?
Yes. Thanks. I'll be a little bolder. I don't think we'd be here if we shouldn't be looking at the neighborhood nodes in the master plan. I think that's kind of the whole point. I mean, right? A couple things to that. Talk about community engagement. I think the city as a whole, we're trying to figure out best way to get some initiatives for community engagement to make it meaningful and effective. I've said it a lot. I said it in this room a few months ago, but the best way to get a community involved is to propose a controversial development in their neighborhood. But that said, I don't think we should be doing that. Maybe if there's a way to not have to have it be that extreme, that would be a good thing. And some stay involved, like Mariana, for example. I'll call her out. She originally got very involved because of a project near her neighborhood, and same with Karen, right? I mean that's what started all of this. No, but those are the things that those are the things that get people involved and engaged. But there has to be a better way to do that without increasing everyone's blood pressure and all of those things. I find it really also fascinating that I was on council in 2016 when we amended minorly the master plan, which I will say it clearly on the record, I think is a beautifully done master plan. So much of it should be a model for other cities and communities, right? I mean, it's not about scrapping some bad plan. It's a beautiful plan, but there's obviously some growing pains that have happened. And when we amended it in 2016, there hadn't been those controversial things come before us or before council as much. Since 2016, all of a sudden, that's all we've dealt with. And so, I think that's great data to say, hey, we need to be looking at these, otherwise we're just on a bad path. The other part of that is that we've talked a lot about, and former members of council and some on planning commission have talked about consistency and predictability for developers and residents, right? We need to somehow address what that means because there's been some very high profile projects that have been recommended for approval by planning, but that have come to council and been shot down. And half of me says, that's a developer's risk they take whenever they're doing something. On the other side of that, I don't want to be whipping people around in that same regard. So there has to be a better way to balance some of that and provide the predictability and consistency they need, but also the neighbors need, and the residents, so that they're not getting whiplash by these projects at the last minute. So in summary, yes.
Mayor, council, members of planning commission, I wanted to make a comment going back to Mayor Baker's comments and Councilwoman Erickson Galt's comments related to public input. And we have done public input. I'm more specifically talking about the master plan. We've gone a bit above and beyond the legal requirements, but we recognize that we're going to have to really up our game in citizen engagement. And that is something that it will be to a level that we have never done in the past. It will take a lot more time and effort and money to be able to do that. But it means going to each of the nodes and finding out what the people want in each of those nodes. And Dick, Brent, myself, and Ben, we go to sessions to learn about really advanced techniques. And really, the best way to get that input is to go where the people are and bring food.
Which we're lacking tonight. I just want to put on the record, there's no refreshments here. But anyway.
I didn't get up here to stifle any more comments, and I don't know if we're still conducting the facilitation, but I did want to say that clearly the next steps is for Brent and Ben to work with the Planning Commission to make the determination that the master plan needs to be revised, because that would be the next step. Then the Planning Commission declares that, and then that kind of starts the ball game, and then we'd have to decide what exact process we would do to amend the master plan, which will take time in itself. And we would have to cost it out and potentially budget for it too.
Microphone.
the Baker, that you mentioned that you read the master plan, it's pretty comprehensive. My feeling is master plan has not too much problem. The problem is the execution part. Because, the zoning ordinance has to have the requirements so that when an application comes, then Brent can say that, hey, you have to have this, otherwise you cannot build an apartment complex here. Because my feeling is there's too much gray area between master plan and zoning ordinance. That becomes the discretion of planning commission or city council. So that the citizens are being disappointed. They have to come like 3 times, 4 times to get the approval. So if we really want to do something, we can just write it down on the zoning ordinance that, hey, this neighborhood node, we have to do this. Because there is a laundry already there. I don't need to have a laundry, but there is no gym here. I need to have a gym. I'm just making it up. So if we be more specific and we agree and we write down in the zoning ordinance, then it becomes very easy. Then it's crystal clear what do we want to do. And obviously we will do this requirement based on the inputs from the community. I think that way balance between the master plan and zoning ordinance will work. Only master plan revision will not change. Because I was telling you that I read the master plan, the neighborhood knows. I was surprised how thoughtful at that time it was. It was 15 years ago. So I just want to make that comment. Thanks.
You should do really well on the test at the end of this then.
Probably a question for staff to follow up with, and this is actually a question for city council as well, is state law was changed maybe 10 or 15 years ago to give city council the option of approving the master plan or kicking it back to the planning commission. So if I'm correct, that's something city council should start thinking, do we want to be the ones that actually adopt the master plan or not?
In 2008, city council did not adopt it. They gave that authority to the planning commission. The amendment in 2016, city council did adopt. I would anticipate that, I see the mayor's head nodding, so.
I see, I see you have 4 nodding heads, so that's consensus.
Yeah, I think your question was just answered, Mr. Lambert. Good. So.
Does that conclude your presentation, or are you still going?
Yeah, it does. So next steps. So first of all, I want to thank Ben and Dick Carlisle for this tonight. We've had a partnership with Carlisle Workman Associates for over 20 years. I think pound for pound of the best planning firm in the state of Michigan by a long shot, and we're very lucky to have them as our consultants. So thank you for being here this evening. So next steps. To continue on a theme, very briefly, City Council sets policy, adopts the master plan. They also approve laws, the zoning ordinance, amendments to the zoning ordinance, and the Planning Commission provides recommendations to council on those items, also implements the zoning ordinance. So it's a very important relationship, and it's important that we meet on a regular basis. So this is the first in a series of meetings, so we're getting back to getting in a rhythm of these, so which is a good thing. And we'll look for one in the near future. Zoning ordinance amendments, as Ben indicated, there is a text amendment related to the neighborhood nodes, limit height and setbacks. And we waited on that because we had a series of orientation meetings with City Council. We wanted to get through those and we wanted to have this. There's also a very busy agenda coming up at the end of February where we're going to be appointing, potentially selecting a replacement to fill that vacant seat on City Council. So we're probably looking at the first meeting in March to have a public hearing on that text amendment. I haven't talked to Mark yet, but I will. So that's a short-term solution to some of the issues that we talked about this evening. But obviously, the long-term solution is to update the master plan. There's value in meeting regularly. It was a very productive, effective meeting this evening. Having an issue, that issue is transition, master plan, and neighborhood nodes. I want to assure people in the audience that it was a really good timing because of the fact that we have to update our master plan by law, or at least make a finding that we have to update it by 2021. So the timing's perfect. But for those in the audience, City Council's heard the concerns about the neighborhood nodes. Staff has heard your concerns about the neighborhood nodes. The Planning Commission has heard your concerns about the neighborhood nodes. That's a big part of why we're here this evening. So we are listening. This is a first step of a lengthy process, but your voice has been heard.
All right, back to me, I guess. That concludes the business stated and the special meeting notice regarding D1. So we move on to public comment. Earlier, city staff went around and collected some names of those who would like to speak, who signed up to would like to speak. I'm assuming there may be some who would like to be added to this list. We do have our timer here. You're given 3 minutes. When the light turns yellow, you have 1 minute left. Again, I can't tell you what not to say or what to say, but I will remind you that this, if you could try to keep your comments specific to tonight's agenda and not on specific projects. One, because there's been public hearings on certain projects and there will be in the future. But I think it's a better use of everyone's time and for efficient purposes to keep them more general. Obviously, specific projects have been talked about tonight or specific intersections, so there's going to naturally be some comments relating to those things, and we understand that. So with that said, I will go ahead and start with the first on this list, which is Doug Gerard, and public comment will be up at the front, and please speak into the microphone, not only so we can hear you in the room, but it is being recorded to be played on YouTube later. The ratings will be high. Is it being streamed live? Well, and it's being streamed live right now, so. Go ahead, Doug.
Good evening. My name is Doug Gerard, and I live at 4197 Carson Drive, and I've been a resident of Troy for over 43 years. I have several concerns regarding the neighborhood nodes. My first concern is health, safety, and welfare. Why should setbacks in neighborhood nodes that abut major roads, such as Crooks Road or Livernois, only be 10 feet or so? Children that play outside their front door that live maybe in a new townhome or something that's built will have their lives at risk, and they should have a safe environment to play. Another concern I have is the declining property values. With the potential of high-density developments being built, entire neighborhoods will feel the impact of their property values declining when they sell their house especially. Not to mention the negative effect it will have to the city of Troy for future tax revenue. Neighborhood nodes have two designated types, Type A or Type B. Type B, according to the master plan, should be low impact and provide a high benefit to the neighborhood. In my opinion, a 3-story townhome abutting a single-family residential neighborhood is not low impact and is not compatible with single-family residential homes. A good match for some nodes would be attached single-family homes that are designated in the missing middle section of the Troy Master Plan. These attached single-family homes would meet the transitional and compatibility needs that residents are looking for in neighborhood nodes. Flooding is another concern. The lane drain runs right behind my property as well as my other neighbors. We have had 2 major sewage backups in our basement in addition to flooding. If and when the proposed townhomes are built, the land will need to be elevated, causing additional water runoff, and the flooding will only intensify. Lastly, traffic. We've talked about that already, but it's a huge concern. We already have many congested intersections in Troy. One of them, as an example, is the intersection at Waddles and Crooks. Just north of Waddles, off of Crooks, is Fountain Drive. Trying to get out of Fountain Drive or into Fountain Drive, especially during rush hours, is extremely dangerous. The traffic backups at this location will only get worse if townhome development is approved. When future
Mr. Gerard, that does conclude your 3 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we'll be hearing from you again.
Okay,
all right,
thanks.
Thank you. Next on the list is Avis Landmesser. Could we bring a microphone to her?
I really do.
And I no doubt believe you will be there, as you have been for the better part of a year or so, or more at this point. So next on the list is Marcia Bossenberger.
Marcia Bossenberger on Ottawa Drive. First of all, Mayor Baker, thank you for all your words you said. I'm so glad you're listening to us. It was heartfelt in all of the new members that are on council and your words. I felt like you finally heard us. And so that was just really wonderful to hear. It takes a lot of fear away that something ugly is not going to pop up in my backyard or across the street. And as I was writing things down, you were also popping it up, and so this is going to get shorter. At the very beginning, I couldn't finish writing the sentences, but it says, to prevent nuisances. I forget which comment that was. I want to say developers create a lot of blight and nuisance. And that was especially you could especially see it during the campaign. You're like, ooh, that's a really cruddy house, but it has political signs in the front yard. And you go home, you look on the planning portal, and you pop in the address, and it's a developer sitting on it, letting it fall apart, letting the doors chip. You know, even vacant lots, you know, will have a tire on it or being littered. And there needs to be an accountability to keep our city looking beautiful. Let's see. And then I have always had an issue, of course, with the dense housing and the nodes, but also the dense housing and cluster developments where I know there's supposed to be this green space. I see the green space work on large plotted areas. I see it work when it's 20 acres and then you're left with like a pond and a wooded area, but it doesn't work on small parcels. You're left with this piece of like a house is going to get a bonus space in their backyard, and they're just going to treat it like that's part of their yard, and it doesn't connect on small parcels. So when it says developer is allotted 10 homes, but because he does the green space, he can build 15 homes. There's still more brick than there's grass. So why not say do the open space plan, but do the 10 homes that you're allotted by right. You're going to get more space, more green space, more usable space, and less water runoff. Let's see. Oh, and the neighborhood nodes interfering with the safety of the kids bicycling to school. I really do have an issue at Square Lake. Just the other day, my son got this really fancy, like, electric bird scooter, and he wants to ride it over to Grandma's house and cross Square Lake.
10 seconds?
He asked me permission, Mom, if he did not have to use the intersection because he felt it was too dangerous.
Thank you, Ms. Bossenberger. Next on the list is Jerry Roush.
My name's Jerry Rauch. I live at 4187 Penrose Drive. And I also want to thank the council, the commissioners, the planning staff for doing this, the time you're putting into this, and your comments on your vision, your concerns, and your solutions. I also want to really thank the planning staff and the consultants for giving us the background of the neighborhood nodes. I think that there's some solutions for our interim issues while you guys are looking at making changes or doing additional studies. The visions that stood out that I heard tonight, really there was no comment on a desire or a vision for residential really being developed in the nodes. And the key concerns, one of the most important ones I heard was Commissioner or Councilwoman Abraham's need to enhance the neighborhood, which fit in with the compatibility and having a benefit. And it also fit in with the solutions that came out, which was engagement, both engaging the neighborhood and the nodes, engaging each other. And I think that, again, that is an interim issue. Given the background information we were given on the nodes, the intent was this village center, which seemed to be more of a retail, social, and go-to place. And that exists today. And I think if the Planning Commission can focus on that and issues that come before them before any changes are made, would really be a benefit to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Paul Ballas.
Good evening. My name is Paul Bayless. 40-year resident of Troy and live directly across the street from where the proposed development at Crooks and Waddles will be going in. Just a couple of comments. First of all, based upon the discussion today, I'm very, very comfortable that our concerns have been heard and voiced this evening, which is just frankly very, very heartening as someone who's sat through several meetings and read a large portion of the master plan. Two comments come to mind. One, I believe Councilwoman Hoderick, thinking and looking at what the neighborhood nodes were defined as in the master plan, and then looking at the pictures that were put up of the proposed development. And frankly, I think one of the better pictures was used of the development, which only showed about 10 of the units as opposed to 74 units. It was just startling and stark to say that this is what was envisioned for a neighborhood node type environment. And then secondly, in the spirit of the quotes from the city manager, maybe Wayne Gretzky, I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. And I think if we think about that as we're looking at the master plan, you know, that may give us a longer term vision of, is this really where we want things to go? So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the list is Deborah Luzecki.
First of all, I have to say, I'm so excited with our new council and also the commissioners. It's interesting to see this kind of meeting. Thank you guys for putting this on, because it really gives us as the, just to look in to see what you guys have to look at. Because even though when we come in and complain in front of the commissioners and we come and complain in front of council, you guys have rules, ordinances, zoning, things of stuff that you have to work within. So it's great to be able to hear your own voices saying your concerns, that you hear us and that you're working on it. A couple things. The neighborhood node that I'm most concerned about is Square Lake and Livernois. I know we don't want to talk about specific developments, and that's not what I'm here for. But my concern is if you look at our little corner, that used to be Troy Corners. That's where Troy started. That's where a lot of, we have in that area, we still have historical homes. We have lack of sidewalks. We have the Livernois and Square Lake both are only 120 feet right away. So we have the narrowing roads right there. You have three major schools. You've got Martell Elementary, you've got Smith, you've got our new wonderful state-of-the-art preschool. You got a lot of people going in and out of that corner there. I'm concerned there's a lot of developing being done, but there's a lot of property being bought up around there. And my one question I'm going to ask people is to consider, what do we do until we get to this new master plan? What do we do till we get to what we want as far as in each one of these nodes? Moratorium? I don't know. I would really like you to consider that, because I'm concerned that now that things are starting to change, that now we're going to have let's all hands jump on board. And I just want to make sure that those are at least looked at. Some of the other things I'd like to bring up, I love how the commissioners have been trying to work on the quality of exterior. If you look around, I'm in real estate, I've been doing it forever, but if you go around and look at different areas around us and you look at their 2-story, 3-story units, most of them are all brick. Why do we have to have vinyl? Or, you know, or at least something, make at least it look nice. And you know, and here's my other concern. We say a lot about the development that is now up, so that we're all looking at, which is at Square Lake and Livernois, and that, just so you know, is that you guys had just talked about, it's 43 units on 5 acres. But you know what? They all bought into that, and they're there. And I'm concerned about values. So I've got a great idea. You probably think it's really crazy, but Rochester Hills just put in another small downtown. I think that would be great for that corner. Just something to throw out there. You could have quieting. Look, I know I have to stop, but I mean, it would be a cool thing that if you could maybe look at something like that, because you got a lot of stuff going on.
Thank you. So that concludes those that had signed up prior to the meeting. My hunch is there might be somebody else who would like to say something, again, without encouraging mass public hearing comment, which is fine. But Mr. Bloomingdale, you want to go ahead and step forward?
Initially, I came to listen more than talk. I lived in Troy since 1971. I was invited here by the girl I've lived with married to for 57 years. Second best decision I made moving here. Hers was the first. I'm excited to see the community engagement again. There was a lot of problems in the past. There's a lot of people sitting here know that with the community involvement, good decisions were made. The library for one, and several others. In regard to developers, I worked for 40 years. I like them, but I'll tell you this: they're going to maximize their profits, and then the community at large lives with the consequences of that for the rest of the time they're there. So it's something that really needs to be addressed. They shouldn't be telling us what they're going to do. We should be telling them what they're going to do. Now, I got no problem with them making money because I earn my wages off of them, like a lot of other people did. But I'm living with a situation right now that happened probably 15 years ago that dumped all the traffic for that development into my street. We got small kids living on it now. The neighborhood's in transition, and it's sad. I want to say thanks to the members of the Planning Commission and the City Council for orchestrating this, and then also sitting meetings like this in the future. I think that we'll find that there's a lot of good thinking to come out of it. There's a lot of good comments that were made by the people sitting at the table. And with that, I want to say thanks again.
Thank you, sir. It's hard for me to see behind, so I'm going to try to work around if that's okay. So Sunil Sivaraman. And then Brian, you'll be next.
Hi, good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you for putting this joint session together. I'm Sunil Shivaraman, 723 Palermo. For the record, I was not going to speak until I saw the next step slide. So I'm bringing in 25 years of Ford Motor Company experience as a computer engineer, developing working tested software and releasing it every 3 to 4 weeks. So that's a viewpoint I'm coming with. So the master plan is a monolith. It's huge. It's a mammoth. So this is just a suggestion. Thin slice it. Thin slice of work that you want, either like the way Mr. Rahman suggested, saying what is more important to us? Is it the neighborhood nodes on Rochester Road? Is it the neighborhood nodes that's on Livernois? Thin slice the work and come up with an active suggestion for it. And in terms of transparency, my open request is 3 to 4 weeks, come out and tell us what you've done. Either on the website, on the Planning Commission Board, the City Council, tell us what has been accomplished. Tell us you have looked at Node 1, Node 2, Node 3 on Rochester Road, and this is the next step on it. Let's not wait for the monolith. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up will be Brian Waddles.
Thank you. I'm Brian Waddles, 34-year resident of Troy. A couple things about the neighborhood nodes I wanted to bring up. This is a great meeting. I think you guys did a good job because a lot of your concerns were my concerns. I'm glad to hear them being aired. When you go to look at these neighborhood nodes, decide whether you really need it to be a neighborhood node. I live next door to one, the one at Waddles and Livernois. Everything is developed, all 4 corners. You've got a school, you've got a museum, you've got a residence, you've got an office building. There's nothing left to do other than one small little parcel, the one next to me. I negotiated with the city, the Catholic Church, many years ago when St. Lucy's went in to have that environmentally protected zone. My assumption, famous word, was that I would be notified if anybody wanted to rezone the environmentally protected land. So I figured, I'll wait for the letter. If the Catholic Church or somebody else wants to rezone it, I'll be told. Happened to be in Rent's office one day, I'm looking at the master plan map. I see this neighborhood node. Where's the EP zoned parcel? Gone. I asked Brent, I said, how come I didn't get a notification when you rezoned it? He said, we didn't do that when we created the neighborhood nodes. There were too many properties involved. So the point you made about engaging the public is the classic case. All the time I've been here, when the buildings go up, that's when the people start getting angry. I don't know how you're going to do it. Brent and I have talked about this many times. How do you get people to be engaged earlier on? I don't have an answer for that, but it's necessary. I mean, if I had been told that I needed to attend the master planning sessions when you're creating the neighborhood nodes, so I could say, this is environmentally protected. What are you going to put in here now? Could be anything. You know, it's all up to Walsh College what they want to do with it because they own it now. So the 2 points about should that be a node because it's all developed, and there may be other nodes that don't make sense to be a node anymore. So when you go through this process of analyzing them, should they be a node? And somehow, some magical trick, engage the public. This is an example of how to do it, but I don't know how far it has to go as you go through this whole process, because a lot of people don't show up until the stuff goes up in their backyard. So thanks for this process. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Waddles. Anyone else from this section? Sir, please make sure you state your name when you get to the microphone.
I'm Mahendra Kenkre. I'm a 20-year resident of the city. I live on 4931 Seasons Drive. This was a great educational session. I really liked it. And I especially liked the part of history of the master plan. And in 2005 was the Vision 2020. And it seemed like there was a lot of interest, very strong interest to create a neighborly atmosphere at certain locations in the city. And now 15 years later, what we have is high-density housing. And the vision was to create a village-like atmosphere. And I don't really see how high-density housing fits in a village. I mean, a village or a small town does not really come to mind. So I think there is a disconnect has opened up between the vision and where we are. And if you really want to get a handle on it, I think you need to go back to the vision and then let that vision drive where you want to go. Because if you don't, then the high density housing itself takes a life of its own. And the conversation becomes, how do you manage high density housing? How do you control high density housing? But that was not part of the vision. I don't know in 2005 how many people even talked about high density housing. But somehow we ended up there. And I think we kind of need to get a handle on that. Otherwise, we will end up just trying to figure out how to do high density housing in Troy when the vision never talked about it. So that's my input to you as the policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, anyone else from this section? Last call for this section. All right, those of you behind me. Ann, go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Ann Brutel, and I live at 3425 McClure Road in Troy, and I have lived here for over 30 years now. And I love all the discussion, and I am proud of this new council and proud of the new commission. But I just want to throw in another thing for us to think about, and that is I am a little concerned about the number of restaurants that are closing, restaurants that are opening, hotels that are going in when our current hotels aren't even full. And that's it. It's just, I'm part of the Troy Chamber of Commerce Hospitality Committee, and I know a couple of you were at a meeting recently, and that is a huge concern. Do we have enough public and business support for what we're bringing into this city? And we just need to really take a good, close look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that section's closed. Over here. Sarah, go ahead. Oh, it's Omar.
Good evening. Omar Shahayab, lived in Troy my whole life. Grew up on Waddles at the Waddles Creek condominiums. And, you know, my father, Kamal, actually lived in the Somerset Apartments before he moved over there. So, and I went to school over at the Montessori at the time, over on Livernois and Waddles. So, what's that? It is. It is in the node. And, you know, I live in Troy now. You know, I live over on Beach and Waddles, and my father and brother and I have a development company, and we also own commercial property that, you know, we rent out. So I might be the lone wolf in the room, you know, to be, I wouldn't say pro-development, but pro-responsible development, not only for the next 5 to 10 years, but for the next 20 to 30. You know, development is market-driven at the end of the day. We don't dictate what people want, right? At one time, and I'm sure many people know this, the American dream, and this was only 15 years ago, was a 4,000 to 5,000 foot McMansion, right? And we found over the last 10, you know, since the Great Recession, that people are looking more for a 2,200 to 3,200 square foot home. Now, granted, you know, I'm not going to discuss Crooks Road development, but, you know, we do own about 10 acres in the node right on that corner, some of which is proposed for development, and then others currently are not. And we've had it up on the market, you know, the property right on the corner on the southwest and on the northwest for commercial development, for some of the things that I think the node was trying to achieve, whether it be a dry cleaner, whether it be a coffee shop, whether it be a preschool. In fact, we did have a preschool that wanted to, you know, open up shop, and then they found out that Troy was doing an early learning center, and they didn't want to compete with, you know, City Hall. So I think over time, those corners will have what the planners were envisioning when the master plan was written. Today, it might not, but there is a 7-Eleven, there is, you know, a medical office, and then room for another tenant over there. So I guess the question is, you know, was the node envisioned to have, you know, one plan all at once, or could it potentially grow into the vision? So part of the, you know, the mixed use aspect is already there with the 7-Eleven and with the office. And I think more of it will come. It's not there today. But is it really fair to assume that any development in the node has to include all of it all at once? I don't have the answer, but I think that's what people are looking for. But I don't really get that notion from reading the ordinance.
Thanks, Omar.
Thank you.
I guess I'll give you credit for showing up to a potentially semi-hostile crowd, but so give you that. Yeah.
Russell Reynolds, 1112 Heartland Drive, so I'm one of the few that aren't anywhere near these developments that are going on. But I want to thank the City Council and Planning Commission for hosting this joint meeting and going over their concerns with these developments. In regards to Dick's article about transitional housing for the elderly as people age, I haven't read it, but I look forward to reading it. The same type of housing that would interest those, the single story, the smaller houses talking 1,000 to 1,500 square feet, are also the type of housing that first-time home buyers are looking for. And many people of my generation can't afford to live in Troy. I've lived here for 5 years now. I was extremely lucky to find the house I'm in. Had to do a lot of work on it, but I was able to actually afford in Troy. And my wife also works at International Academy, so lucky we got really close to that. But we need to focus on that type of housing as our aging community has a place to live so that they don't have to move elsewhere. Also, with all this development along the Big Beaver corridor and elsewhere, you see a lot of chains, a lot of franchises. What's missing is small businesses, entrepreneurs, people who live in the community and are able to open a space of their own. A lot of it's probably they're priced out of the market. They have to go elsewhere in order to afford a space of their own to do what they want to do, whether it's open a restaurant or a small business. And that's something that we need to explore with these nodes, with the Big Beaver and Rochester corridors, is how to promote small businesses and entrepreneurs and attract them to the community so they don't go to Rochester, they don't go to Ferndale, Clawson downtown, which is having a lot of redevelopment right now. That's basically all I had to say, so thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Anyone else from this section? Okay. Well, the agenda doesn't specifically call for reply or response from council and planning commissions, but what I'd like to do, if it's okay with everybody, and I know Karen, as long as you're home in bed by midnight, you'll be okay, as I recall. But we should be okay on time. I'd like to go around the table, and maybe if anyone wants to reply to anything specifically that was said or give a 30-second closing statement for tonight, I think that would be only fair to all of us and would be a good thing for the community. So I'd like to start with Chairman Krent and work around if we can.
I'll make it easy. I've enjoyed this, all the conversations. I have nothing else to add at this point.
Is that an example?
Just thank you to the city staff for setting this up, and Planning Commission for joining us, and residents for being so involved. And I think we're in a good place. I think we're heading in the right direction. And I'm really looking forward to doing annual reviews of the master plan. I think that's very important, something we need to start doing.
I've enjoyed this immensely. I've been in the Planning Commission for 14 years, and now I get a lot of people thinking like I do.
I've appreciated the opportunity to learn. I've had virtually zero experience with planning and development before I began running for this position a year ago. And this has been, as a friend of mine said, like drinking water from a fire hose. So, but I really appreciate the initial presentation that broke it down. And I very much appreciate hearing from the public, because ultimately that's who we're representing. And the public does include developers. The public does include all of the people living in our existing neighborhoods and all the people that want to move to Troy. So we need to listen.
Again, I really enjoyed this session, so a lot of learning. Really appreciate the city staff for organizing this. And also thank you, the City Council, for joining us and having this good discussion. And thank you to all the public here, for your participation and input.
Just a really great quality discussion, great background. We do represent the residents and developers when we sit at the City Council table. And the master plan has been serving us actually very well in many, many respects. The zoning has allowed us to make some very tough decisions that have stood. But it's clear to me, watching our planning commissioners with their lengthy meetings, it shouldn't be this hard. There's a disconnect, and this is really a wonderful, constructive first step at making a better connection for our decisions to be easier to make, for our developers to work with us more constructively. I think this will help our developers as well as serve our residents, and that should be our goal. So thank you. Thank you for everybody that's been involved or commenting on social media or whatever you're doing. It is with engagement we get a quality city, and this is great engagement. Thank you.
Excellent meeting, excellent feedback from the residents, and we obviously have our work cut out for us for the next at least 12 months.
One thing that I want to make sure that I reiterate tonight to everyone that's in the room is, it's been a while since we've done a joint session, and I think we're long overdue. But I do want to underscore and reiterate the fact to everyone in this room, particularly the residents, that over the past few years, we have had a lot of controversial projects come in front of Planning Commission. And what I want everyone to understand is that not once did your Planning Commission not hear everything that you heard or what you had to say. Now, we are in a position where sometimes the law doesn't give us a lot of discretion, it doesn't give us a lot of latitude, and we have to make decisions that are unpopular. It depends on the zoning. But there's never been a time you haven't been heard. We understand that the city is important to all of us that live here. And the fact that we are living in a thriving and sought-after city is a good thing, despite the pain points. I mean, if you've got development in a city, that's a fabulous thing. So I think that, you know, as we continue to work together, just understand that while you may not ultimately like an outcome, that doesn't mean you weren't heard or that your comments were not appreciated. That is just not true.
I'm going to skip you, Mark, and move to John.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I, like Mike, have been on the commission for 14 years. The last few years have been challenging. It was said a few years ago that really all that's left in Troy were the tough sites. There weren't the easy sites any longer, and that's proven to be true. I appreciate the comments tonight, and I will tell you personally, knowing the people that I know around this table and staff, the consultants, we have some big challenges ahead of us, but we're up to the task. But I will also say that the residents have to be engaged with this. And again, there are ways to do it a little differently than it's been done in the past, and we will try those vehicles to do that. But this really is going to be a collaborative effort, and that we will find compromise positions where, you know, maybe not everybody is going to love the outcome, but you know the effort will be there to find the best solution that we all can come to a point of agreement with. So thank you for your being here tonight and your thoughts, and look forward to working with you.
Just wanted to thank all the residents who showed up here tonight, and Mayor and Council for sitting with Planning Commission to kind of get our perspective, and also the city staff and consultants for all their hard work on this presentation. And just wanted to mention, I'm glad there was some discussion about the Rochester Road Corridor, which is some area that we also need to look at. And also, from a selfish perspective, I'm glad staff brought up the silver tsunami.
Thank you to everyone who's out here tonight. Thanks to the Troy City Council for inviting Planning Commission, and to the staff who put this together. It was a great opportunity, I thought, and I thought it was really helpful to hear the residents. I jotted down some notes of what you guys said, and I think there's definitely things we can take into consideration. One of the things we didn't talk about tonight was about improving notice requirements. For this meeting, for example, I thought we did a fairly good job, but also notice requirements of when things are popping up in people's neighborhoods, that they shouldn't be in 6-point font buried in a newspaper. When we do use social media now, we should be a little bit, I think we should improve we shouldn't be at the minimum standards. You know, this is Troy, we should enter the 21st century and be a little bit more modern about that. The other thing I want to make sure that we do as a Planning Commission and as a City Council moving forward with this new master plan, and as we revisit everything, is also make sure that we're holding developers to a high standard to ensure the integrity of everything. You know, when we ask developers to revisit something or to do something, and then they come back to us meeting after meeting, and, you know, changes have been made and we're getting closer, every single meeting that they come to, we're asking residents to take time out of their evening too, and it wears everyone down. It wears out the Planning Commission, it wears out everybody really who's involved. So I think we need to maintain a certain standard and make sure that the information that's being presented to us is accurate as well. So I think that's something we should look into. But thanks, everyone. I want to end on a positive note. That sounded
just
very
smile
negative.
at the end. Just smile. That's all you do. There you go.
But anyway, this was a very positive meeting. Thanks.
Great meeting. Thanks for organizing it.
Learned a lot while being on the planning commission for a while, learned a lot. The history and the context was great. Appreciate the public and their engagement and their comments and the way they made the comments and their preparation. And finally, look forward to working to resolve some of the issues that we've identified and having more meetings like this to do that. So thank you.
Yes, this was a wonderful meeting. I think it was put together very, very, very well. It was educational. I think everybody learned a lot. We had a good turnout. Thank you for all the residents that came in and gave us their input. I think that it's very, very valuable for us to hear from you. I think community engagement is a key. Moving forward, we have to have community engagement. And however we can do that, however we can include as many people as we can in this process, I think that that is the key to a success moving forward. And I do agree, we represent both the residents, we represent developers, because developers are our residents as well. And so we have to come to some sort of compromise and find things that work for everybody. And so I think this was a great first step.
Coming into this meeting, I got a lot of questions or comments that hinted that this meeting could be adversarial, that there was going to be us versus them, whether it was residents versus council, or council versus planning commission, pick any configuration. And what I'm really heartened to hear, and I hope the residents heard it too, there's no us or them, it's we. We can fix these issues, all of us together. There's nothing here that we can't fix. It will take time, it'll take engagement, it'll take a lot of resources, but it's worthwhile. Because to me, the hardest part isn't finding the solution. The hardest part is acknowledging that there's an issue to begin with. And I think residents heard clearly. I think all of us at the table are hearing each other. We weren't talking past each other. I think we're acknowledging where we have some shortfalls, where things didn't quite live up to what had been envisioned and what should our vision be. So I think this is a first step, but it's a really important first step, and this sets the tone, I think, for the next year or two very nicely, and I really appreciate everyone's comments here at the table, for those that spoke, and for those that didn't speak tonight but have come to Planning Commission or council meetings on a regular basis. We hear you, and I was heartened to hear that you now feel like you are being heard too, and that you guys are part of the solution as well. So thank you.
Thank you. It's always hard to go after Edna. I didn't plan that right. I should have gone the other way. No offense. Oops. I thank you to city staff. And I'm going to say, I start with a thank you and say, you're going to have to keep doing a lot of this, it looks like, from what we're going. But you all worked really hard, and Carlisle Wortman, you guys being here, and your historical insight and your willingness to engage us and work with us and actually have us do something constructive, as opposed to previous models of presentation, talking heads, adjournment. I think this is a much better use of our time, and it's a much better face for our city to be putting forward and working through these issues. Thank you also to the audiovisual people. I know this is a different surrounding, and you're working hard to make sure this is being streamed live on YouTube and will be on YouTube, because I think there's a lot in the community who will want to watch this YouTube video back, and I think they're going to have a good opportunity to do that. It's going to be a good thing. Thank you to all of the fellow council members and the planning commissioners. And Edna's right about, is this going to be adversarial, or, we've heard a lot of things. And I think in the past, maybe we've been pitted against each other a little bit because of some projects that came before us. I think that the big surprise maybe it's not so much of a surprise, but might be to the residents who are here and to some of us, is that we all kind of sound like we're saying the same thing. So if we all have a similar outlook, that should make it a little bit easier to move forward in a good way. To the residents that spoke, I took notes on everything all of you said, and I'd love to be able to address each of you individually, but I don't think this is the right time to do that. Karen, you said something about development. It's a good problem to have when we have a lot of development in the city. It is a good problem. I mean, Ellen, you talk a lot about how the place where you grew up, the city kind of died away because development stopped there, and that's not what we want for Troy. So there always is that balance that we need to work toward, and part of that is community engagement and residents listening. And to that point, A lot of you have social media, and out in the public who are here tonight, forward the link to this YouTube video to your friends and neighbors. Post it on your social media, and anytime there's a meeting notice, I'm going to do my best to post on my social media, but we can talk about the city maybe posting some notices on their Facebook account as well. Obviously, minimum requirements are just that, the minimum. We can always do more than that for notice purposes, so we can talk about that as a council. But this was a great start, I think, and I really thank all of you who showed up tonight. And again, thank you, Mark, and for your team and staff for doing a great job of giving us a great launching point. And I think we do have a lot of work to do, but I think we're up for it, and look forward to the next one. So with that, I'm going to adjourn. Thank you.